Hi, I'm Tyler Moore, and today I'm going to be talking to you about cooperative learning for the chemistry lab. Now, in the science lab, we generally don't want students, sitting in nice, neat rows, absorbing information from the teacher as they lecture at us. What we would like students to do instead would be to work in small groups and to interact with each other as much as possible. Well, cooperative learning is essentially that, where students work together in small, heterogeneous groups and that promote mutual dependence and joint responsibility in the learning process, right? They're working together on a common goal and they're all interacting with each other simultaneously. Cooperative learning is not group work. Now, let's take a look at three different types of learning structures within the classroom and see how cooperative learning compares to these. In our traditional learning classroom, right, we're going to have students sitting in rows or in columns all day long. The teacher is going to ask a question. They'll provide think time. The student raises their hand. The teacher calls on one individual student, and that one student responds, and then the teacher tells them whether or not the answer was correct or not. Right? In group work, the teacher is going to give a task. And the teacher says, hey, work together on this project or this assignment or this laboratory. Make sure you help each other, and the interaction is completely unstructured. We know what ends up happening with group work. There's typically one student that dominates the interaction, especially when it comes to a laboratory. They do all of the work, or maybe two if we're lucky, and the rest of the students just kind of sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Right? Cooperative learning is different. Cooperative learning is where a teacher gives a task. So they say, this is your laboratory assignment, and the teacher provides some think time for them to be able to figure out how they might go about doing this. And then there is structured student-to-student interaction, and it is up to the teacher to provide that structure on how that interaction is going to go. Right? So why do we need it? Why do we need to have cooperative learning within a science lab? Well, labs are really essential learning opportunities for students, but they're only really beneficial if all students are participating in that lab. And studies have shown that labs are actually counterproductive if only a certain amount of students monopolize the work or the discussions. So they can be a bad thing. They're good for some students who are actually doing the work, but those that aren't doing the other work, it's really just kind of counterproductive. Cooperative learning models can mitigate these instances of dominance and help ensure equal participation. If we structure our interactions in the laboratory in a very specific way, we can ensure that all students are equally participating and prevent these types of student dominances. Also, one of the issues that we have is if students are participating unequally in the labs, well, then how should we grade the labs? Do we grade labs by participation rate? If a student is participating 50% of the time, do we give them a 50% grade? If one student is doing all of the work, and should they get 100%, right? Do we grade based on accuracy? Or do we simply grade based on completion? If we're grading based on completion, then again, we're really just grading whether or not that student who did the work actually did the work. Accuracy is the same way. That one student who did the work, we just see how accurate they were, but none of the other students. So in order to implement cooperative learning in the science laboratory, we have to think about the framework PIES. Now, PIES stands for Positive Interdependence, for P, and in positive interdependence, we have to think about, are all students on the same side? Are all students working together in order to accomplish a common task? Does this assignment require that they work together? You can give students group work and say, hey, work on this, right? But we know that one student will dominate it because there is no positive interdependence. But if you structure the laboratory in a way where all students have to work together in order to accomplish the task, then we can get more equal participation. I stands for individual accountability. This is where some sort of individual or public performance is required. So how are we structuring the lab to ensure that one individual in that group is being held accountable, that they have to perform in some way, shape, or form? Is there equal participation in the lab, right? Are students participating equally? How do we do that? And are students interacting simultaneously? What I mean is, what percent of the time are students interacting with each other at once. We want them to be talking to each other all of the time during the laboratory, right? The more time we can get interaction with each other, the more learning that is going to be taking place. Now, it doesn't mean they're talking over each other. It just means that they're constantly interacting with each other to accomplish a task. So how do we do it? How do we create cooperative learning within the science laboratory? Well, one way that we can do that is by creating cooperative roles. Now, there are 4 roles that I'm going to introduce here, although there are many different ways that you can set up roles. You can have different roles for different purposes or different roles for different labs, but I feel that these 4 roles that I've come up with are ideal for any laboratory situation. The first role that you can assign a student would be the directions tracker. They're going to speak the directions out loud to their teammates and tell them what needs to be done according to the instructions that are on their lab sheet. This ensures that all teammates are following the directions precisely and they are keeping track of where they are at that particular time. The directions tracker you could think of is also like the project manager. They make sure that everything is getting done in the proper order at the right time and coordinating with everybody else. The materials manager, it seems like a simple role, but it actually is a pretty big responsibility, right? They're going to fetch the equipment and the materials, including all sorts of chemicals, right? And ensure that that laboratory is clean at all times, right? And I think that is a really big difference, right? The lab should be a clean space at all times. They're wiping things up. They're taking the dust brush and they're cleaning up. Right? We talk about clean as you go if you're a chef, and when we're in the laboratory, they should be doing the same thing. Clean as you go to make sure a nice, safe space is happening. It also ensures that the materials manager, when they're finished, they put all the materials back where they got them from, make sure that their area is clean and nice and safe, ready for the next class to come in. The technician. This is a really cool role. I think this is what a lot of students like to do. Some of them maybe not, but they're the ones performing the experiment, right? Again, the directions tracker is going to tell the technician, you need to be mixing these chemicals, you need to be placing this here, you need to be doing that, and the technician performs the experiment to the best of their abilities. And finally, the data manager. The data manager is going to record all the data that needs to be put down on the paper, as well as perform any necessary calculations in order to complete the lab. Again, the directions tracker keeps track of all that. Like I said, it's kind of like the project manager. They'll tell the data manager, all right, we need to calculate this so that we can do this. All right, record this information here. The other way that we can ensure that there's equal participation or we're doing cooperative learning within the science lab is by creating 4 equal parts. Now, traditionally, we're going to have 4 students, so we're going to split it up into 4 equal parts. And if it's certainly possible to do in the laboratory, I would highly recommend it. So in this case, we have a solubility lab in which students are learning the solubility rules of certain chemicals. Right, so we could probably have like student A would be responsible for completing sodium nitrate. So they'll mix sodium nitrate with sodium chloride, then sodium sulfate, then sodium potassium hydroxide, and sodium carbonate. Student B does the next row, student C the next, and student D the next. This allows all students in general to be the lab technician at some point in the lab, right? So by providing roles and splitting your lab into equal parts, you're going to ensure you're following the PIES framework. Positive interdependence. Students are supporting each other to complete the lab. Individual accountability. Students are individually accountable for their role and for the part that they have to complete within the lab. Equal participation. Roles and parts, they're split equally, right? No one person is generally doing more work than the other. And then simultaneous interaction. Students have to verbalize like the instructions. They have to verbalize their support. If there's one student who doesn't understand or is not sure about how to complete their role, other students are relying on that student to complete that role so they can, hey, I know how to do this. Hey, you can do this, right? Oh, hey, make sure you're doing this, right? So it provides a support for that student directly instead of the teacher having to provide it all the time. And they have to verbalize their successes, right? Hey, we did it. They cheer themselves on and they celebrate their successes. Grading. So, how do we grade labs? Don't. Don't do it. Labs are for learning and practice, and I think it's unfair to penalize students for the learning process. But I would say if you do feel that it's necessary to grade labs, make sure you follow these general guidelines. Right? If you have to grade, how well did that student fulfill that particular role? Make sure you have a rubric, and that rubric is very visible for students to see how to fulfill their role and whether or not they're doing it properly and well enough. The other way you can grade a lab is their part accurate and complete? If you split a lab into 4 equal parts, did they complete their lab? And was that part accurate? And finally, you can put a lab question in your unit exam, maybe one or two. If you put one of these lab questions in the unit exam, then you know whether or not the student had gained any information from the lab that they had done previously. All right, to summarize what we just learned, traditional labs tend to be one-sided. We really want students to be learning and cooperating together and learning equally as much as we possibly can. We can do that by following the PIES framework, by creating labs that contain positive interdependence, individual accountability, equal participation, and simultaneous interaction. And one of the ways that we can do that is by creating roles and responsibilities. We've got a directions tracker, the materials manager, the technician, and the data manager. We can also do split the lab into equal parts. Now, we can do both of these together. We can have roles and responsibilities for students, and we can split them into equal parts. But the most basic thing you could do is by just providing students with roles. If you feel the lab can't be split into equal parts, then just give them a role for them to be able to do. Sometimes it's more appropriate to split the lab into equal parts, and we can do that to ensure equal participation. Well, that's it for today. If you do have any questions about how to do science labs and how to do cooperative learning, please let me know and have a great day. Thanks.